$1,000, 899 euros, or 1,15,000 rupees. That's how much the new ASUS ROG Xbox Ally X is going to cost you depending on where you live. Oof, that's so expensive that the first thought that comes to your head is, I could make a powerful gaming PC with that money, right? And I know that after hearing the price, a lot of you want to quit this video immediately, but don't. Because the ROG Xbox Ally X does one thing that most PC gaming handheld aficionados have wanted for a long time. It replaces that dreaded Windows 11 experience with something called the Xbox full screen experience. Now, I've lived with this Xbox full screen experience for the past 2 weeks, and I must say this, I am really tempted to switch out from the Steam Deck OLED. That's my primary device right now. Now, if you're curious, stay with me because I have some very interesting things to say about the ROG Xbox Ally X and compare it to the Steam Deck OLED along the way. If you're watching me for the first time, I'm Ashar. This is Trakin Tech English, your destination for detailed, incisive gaming reviews. Now, the first time I saw the ROG Xbox Ally X, I was like, brother, no, that thing doesn't look very good. Now, 2 weeks later, I still don't find the design very appealing, but the Xbox Ally X is the perfect representation of utility over aesthetics. Think Amazon's website. Basically, ASUS has nailed the in-hand feel and ergonomics. It's actually thicker and heavier than the Steam Deck OLED, which is thick and heavy to begin with. But since you get these Xbox wireless controller style grips, when you hold and play it, you don't feel a bulk of the weight. Now, what I felt is that the textured grips are perfectly contoured and they let you cradle the whole device with your entire hand. Unlike many PC handhelds where your fingers bear most of the load. Plus, the balanced placement of the heavier components makes that 715 grams not feel like 715 grams. Now, you know what? If you get the chance to hold one of these in retail right next to the Steam Deck OLED, then do one thing, hold both the handhelds with just one hand and you will notice that it is actually easier to hold this one over this one. Now, on the faceplate, if you peer closely, you can see a micro printed ROG and Xbox branding, which looks really nice. And at the rear, basically in the air intake holes, you have this fearless eye logo, which also adds a bit of a branded visual identity. Talking about which, the intake vents are on the rear and the exhaust vents are at the top. Also at the top, you get two USB Type-C ports, one Gen 3.2 and the other port supporting USB 4, Thunderbolt 4, DisplayPort, Alt mode and Power Delivery 3.0. You also get a 3.5mm combo audio jack, you get a micro SD card reader which is UHS 2 standard, you get volume buttons and a power button with an inbuilt fingerprint scanner. Now, apart from that, you've got the controls. You've got the left and the right analog sticks, which are not Hall effect, by the way. But they're rated for 5 billion rotations and are actually modular, which means that if you end up with stick drift, unfortunately, on the default joystick, you can actually swap it out for a Hall effect joysticks. Regardless, I really like these joysticks, by the way. You've got the concave on the top, which makes it easy to rest your thumb. And apart from that, the circumference and the height are very similar to what I have on the Steam Deck. In fact, generally, I add like additional grips on top of it, which is probably what I'm going to be doing with this one as well. By the way, just like the original Ally X, even the Xbox Ally X has these, RGB lights around the joystick, which kind of look cool. I'm not a big fan of RGB, but this looks nice. Because the entire console itself is black, right? So this is like a nice dash of color. You also get the Xbox style 8-way D-pad controls and Xbox style ABXY face buttons as well. And in my experience, both the D-pad and the face buttons are actually more tactile and don't feel as soft as they do on the Steam Deck OLED. Actually, you can hear the difference. Yeah? Now, see? You also get LT-RT and LB-RB buttons at the top. They also feel very much like the Xbox wireless controller, and the triggers are actually larger in size compared to the Steam Deck, so it's easier to use as well. More importantly, you get the impulse triggers with the Ally X, which is not available in the regular Xbox Ally. So basically what that means is that you get built-in vibration and haptics, and especially if you're playing a racing game like Forza Horizon, then you can definitely feel that difference. Now, there's also the View, Menu, Xbox, Command Center, Library buttons, and I'll tell you how all of these work in the software section of the review. So overall, if you look at it, the ROG Xbox Ally X has to be the most ergonomic PC gaming handheld in the market today. Now, one thing that is unchanged from the original Ally X without the Xbox branding is the display, which means that there is no OLED here. And compared to the Steam Deck OLED, it's definitely a letdown because the Steam Deck OLED gets much brighter, and it also has support for HDR, which the ROG Xbox Ally X does not offer. Which means that the neon lights of the Night City in Cyberpunk 2077 just pop on the Steam Deck's panel as opposed to ASUS's. However, the ROG Xbox Ally X fights back with variable refresh rate, and it can refresh from anywhere between 48Hz to 120Hz to match the frame rate of the game that you're playing, which ensures that you get smoother tear-free gameplay, which the Steam Deck cannot achieve even with FPS locking, if you ask me. While the Steam Deck looks smooth, but not as smooth as VRR on the Xbox Ally X. Now, while the display might not be the best aspect of the Xbox Ally X, the speakers are absolutely fantastic. Now, both these machines have front-firing speakers, but ASUS gets louder, it's richer, and has more bass. Take a listen to it for yourself.
Good morning, Night City! Yesterday's body count lottery rounded out to a solid and sturdy 30. Good morning, Night City! Yesterday's body count lottery rounded out to a solid and sturdy 30.
And the haptics and rumble motor, well, it's even better. I mean, the Steam Deck was good to begin with, but this just takes it to another level. I was playing a bunch of Doom Eternal, and when Doom Slayer's health actually goes down to a certain level, his heartbeat, you can hear that, there's a sound effect for it. It sounds really good on this, but you know what? The rumble motor matches the sound and gives you the feedback of like an actual heartbeat, which is not true for the Steam Deck OLED, but with the ASUS, it's just fantastic. Now that we're done with the design and the display, let's talk about the software. And like I said, you boot into the full screen Xbox experience. In fact, when you set up the handheld for the very first time, you actually can input the password or lock in the password with the D-pad itself. So that's cool. Anyway, let me just break down the Xbox full screen experience for you, because this is the first time that I'm going to be showcasing it, and it's very interesting. So basically, the first tab is the home screen, and the top row shows the last games that you've played, so you can jump right in. And the rest of the rows are all game recommendations from the store. And the second tab is the Game Pass tab. Again, you get some more game recommendations. But the third tab is your library. So this is all the games that you have downloaded on the device itself. And the final tab is the Xbox Store once again. And below all these tabs are hotkeys to see your notifications, your friends lists, and whatever game you're downloading right now, basically the downloads menu. And now you can use the library button to jump directly into the library. You can also use the view and menu button for any in-game contextual information that you want to change. And the command center and Xbox button open the Armory Crate SE command center in the game bar and the game bar in general. The game bar itself is something that is very useful because you'll be spending a lot of time there tweaking a lot of the settings. So once you open the game bar, you can see the Armory Crate SE command center, and over there you can change all the performance modes that are available. You can, change up the volume and the brightness levels and a bunch of different settings. So that's your basic layout, and you can stay in this Xbox full screen experience for the most part. And I say for the most part because there are many instances where you will have to jump out of the full screen experience and enter the Windows 11 experience. Something that's not true for the Steam Deck OS, which is much more refined. Let me break down a few specific examples for you. For example, if you take screenshots on both the devices, you can actually view all the screenshots within the Steam Deck OS itself or Steam OS itself. But in the ROG Xbox Ally X, you can only see the thumbnails of the image capture. Now, if you want to see the entire image, it boots you back to Windows 11. Apart from this, there are other advantages with SteamOS. Basically, you get suspend and resume. So if you're playing a game, you can just hit the power button, it will just switch off the screen, hit it back on again, and the game starts directly from there. But you do not have suspend and resume for the ROG Xbox Ally X. Another problem with the experience is that there is very little hand-holding or tutorials that guides you into how to do certain things. For example, if you have to open the multitasking carousel, you can long press the Xbox button and it will open it. But for the first 2 days that I was testing the device, I didn't know how to do it, so I would just swipe up from the touchscreen, which is obviously stupid. Despite all of those things that require some fine-tuning, there are some things that I really appreciate about the new Xbox full screen experience. For example, you now have clear labels for handheld optimized games, just like the Steam Deck. Now on the Steam Deck, you can only play games that are purchased from the Steam Store. But on the Xbox Ally X, you can not only play your games that you've purchased from the Xbox Store or from Game Pass, but you can also run Steam, Epic, Battle.net, you name it. And this is one of the major reasons why I am tempted to switch, really. Finally, this could be a bit of a controversial take depending on which side you swing. I mean, I feel like Windows 11 is the more, convenient desktop OS for the larger mass audience compared to Linux at least. But I mean, your mileage could vary. So the gist here is that the Xbox full screen experience requires a few more updates to get to the level of the Steam OS experience. But I still feel like Steam OS will be a step ahead always. Primarily because with Steam OS, you have these large card layouts for the games, which looks pretty cool. And more importantly, it runs fairly stutter-free as opposed to the Xbox full screen experience, which has a few bucks here and there. Now I know that I made you guys wait for a really long time, but let's talk about some gaming. Because I tried out a bunch of games, indies like Hollow Knight Silksong, Cocoon, and proper AAA titles like Expedition 33, Doom Eternal, Doom the Dark Ages, bunch of games. But before I talk about the performance of these games and some benchmarks, let me tell you a little bit about the specs. So the hardware inside is the AMD Ryzen AI Z2 Extreme. You get 24GB of LPDDR5X 8000 shared RAM between the CPU and the GPU, and you also get a 1TB M.2 2280 NVMe SSD. Now this specification makes it the second most powerful PC gaming handheld in the world. The most powerful gaming handheld is actually the newly launched GPD Win 5. Now this one has the AMD Ryzen AI Max Plus 395 Strix Halo SoC. Oh my god, that's quite a mouthful. Now moving on, the Xbox Ally X has 4 performance modes. Basically, you have the 13-watt TDP silent mode, you have the 17-watt performance mode, you have the 25-watt turbo mode, and when it is powered, you get the turbo mode jumping up to 35 watts. Now the Steam Deck has a 15-watt threshold, but you can actually reduce it down to 3 watts if you want. Now you would think that it's pointless comparing the Xbox Ally X, considering the fact that the Steam Deck has an APU that is 3 years old now. Well, that's where you'd be wrong, my friend, because things are about to get really interesting. Stay with me. See, in Cyberpunk 2077 with the Steam Deck preset and FSR 2.1 at 25-watt turbo, the Xbox Ally X offered a 45% better performance. And at similar TDPs, that is basically 17-watt on the ASUS and 15-watt on the Steam Deck, you still get a sizable nearly 20% performance bump. But here's a fun fact. I ran these benchmarks at 1080p on the ASUS, which is 800p on the Steam Deck, which means that ASUS is pushing more pixels. Now just for fun with Cyberpunk, I also switched on ray tracing, and at the ray tracing load setting, I did run a few benchmarks. Now here's where I noticed something interesting is that at 25 watts on the ASUS, you still get a 2% performance headroom compared to the Steam Deck. But at 17 watt, the Steam Deck offers 15% higher frame rates. And that's when I was like, okay, the Xbox Ally X running at 1080p, let's try 720p and match close in terms of pixels. And just like I figured, ASUS immediately jumped up and offered 48% higher frame rates, which goes to show that ray tracing is pretty GPU intensive, and if it has to push more pixels with ray trace light, then you will definitely get a performance hit. Regardless, ray tracing on handhelds, at least these ones that I've been testing, is not there yet. So imagine when smartphone manufacturers say, oh, we have ray tracing. It's a joke. Now in an Unreal Engine 5 based game like Black Myth Wukong, the ASUS is way more powerful. Anywhere between 15 to 60% higher average FPS is what we got based on the settings. This is also the reason why a GPU intensive game like Doom the Dark Ages runs really well on ASUS, which is something that I wouldn't even dare try on Steam Deck. And fun fact, Doom the Dark Ages is actually a handheld optimized game for the Xbox Ally X. By the way, while running the Black Myth Wukong benchmark test, I noticed that TSR, or Temporal Super Resolution, of the Unreal 5 engine is a far better tool than FSR. Like, I mean, at least it looks much better to my eyes, at least on Black Myth Wukong. Another thing that I specifically noticed while testing the Xbox Ally X is that the performance bump from 17 watts to 25 watts, yeah, it is considerable for you to actually, want to do 25-watt turbo for graphically intensive games. But the performance bump from 25 watt to 35 watt, yeah, it's not a lot. Regardless, if you're connecting it to power, might as well use it in turbo at 35 watts. Alright, for the final benchmark, I actually ran Red Dead Redemption 2. And boy, oh boy. I'm reacting like that because ASUS achieves higher frames only at 35 watt TDP. And that is only a 2% difference. But when you bring down the TDP to 25 watts or 17 watts, it actually loses to the Steam Deck, which sounds shocking, but it's not really shocking, primarily because RDR2 is actually well optimized for the Steam Deck's APU. In fact, even bumping the resolution down to 720p on the ASUS didn't help matters. So I did one more thing. I actually changed from Vulkan to DX12 and a little bit of a boost and bump in performance, but it was not too much for me to be like, RDR2 actually runs better on the Xbox Ally X compared to the Steam Deck, because it actually does run better on the Steam Deck. And for the final bit of testing, one thing I noticed with the ROG Xbox Ally X is that it has fantastic thermals. So basically at 25 watt turbo mode, it reaches about 70 to 73 degrees at max, and it stays there. It doesn't even budge. Basically 70 to 74 degrees is what I'm talking about. And if you bump it down to 17 watt TDP, then it's about at 63, 64%. And more importantly, I just couldn't hear the fans. They are very quiet, which is also true for the Steam Deck OLED, by the way. The only time I heard a little bit of a whirring sound was when I pushed it to 35 watt TDP and benchmarked Black Myth Wukong. But yeah, I mean, otherwise, very quiet system. See, I will give you the gist. If you want to play more modern games and have a lot of money, then the Xbox Ally X should be your ally. Bad joke, I know. But if you want to get rid of your backlog, then something like the Steam Deck OLED actually makes more sense. It's also far more affordable. It also has an OLED display, which looks fantastic. Now that I've spoken about the performance analysis, efficiency is something that I tested as well, basically battery efficiency. The Steam Deck OLED, you get a 50 watt-hour battery, and ASUS has an 80 watt-hour battery, similar to what we got with the original Ally X. Now for a comparative battery analysis, I actually played Doom Eternal for 1 hour on both the handhelds. So the resolution was almost matched, and ASUS was at 17 watt TDP, and Steam Deck was at 15 watt TDP. And both the handhelds lost about 36-37% battery life after 1 hour. So if you were to push the ASUS to 25 watt TDP and 1080p, like native 1080p resolution, then you'll definitely lose far more battery. In fact, I did play Hellblade 2 Senua's Saga for about 1 hour 54 minutes, and after playing for about 1 hour 54 minutes, there was only 6% battery left. I started at 100%. So essentially what you can expect is anywhere between 2 hours to 5 hours of gameplay, depending on what performance profile you choose and what game you're playing. Say for example, if you're playing an indie like Hollow Knight Silksong, then it should give you better battery life, about 4 to 5 hours with the Xbox Ally X. But with the Steam Deck OLED, you can actually expect anywhere between 2 hours to 7-8 hours of playtime. The efficiency is much better on the Steam Deck OLED. Now, the more I tested both these devices, what I felt is that the Steam Deck OLED's performance optimization is very similar to what Apple does with the iPhone, whereas with the ASUS, the optimization is very similar to many Android flagship phones that we've tested. Alright, now to conclude, the ASUS ROG Xbox Ally X, quite a mouthful for the name. So basically, Xbox Ally X is prohibitively expensive in India. 1,15,000 is a lot of money. So I would suggest that if you can somehow import the console from Hong Kong, you can get it for about 80,000 rupees. Even for the folks watching from the US, if there are any, basically the $1,000 price tag is pretty high for a PC gaming handheld, and I understand that. For that price, you can get a Steam Deck and you can also get a Nintendo Switch. But here some context setting is very important, because the recently launched Lenovo Legion Go 2 with similar specs as the ROG Xbox Ally X, but of course with an OLED display and 144Hz VRR display, is actually more expensive than the Xbox Ally X. The real cost driver is the AMD chip, and brands have to keep margins, which makes me wonder that Microsoft is actually working with ASUS to make this handheld. Now, like they subsidized the cost of the Series X and the Series S by selling Game Pass and games from the Xbox Store, why couldn't they do that for the handheld? And let's not forget the fact that while you've spent on this, if you want Game Pass and day one games on Game Pass, it has become really expensive. Microsoft has bumped up the prices. Now, a lot of Game Pass owners are really pissed, so much so that they were trying to cancel, and the Xbox side actually crashed. The moral of the story is that gaming is not going to be cheap anymore. All that said, if you can afford it, the Xbox Ally X is easily one of the best PC gaming handheld experiences in the market, if not the best PC gaming experiences in the market. And I would switch out from the Steam Deck OLED in a heartbeat if this one also had OLED and if I had the money. Alright, that was my detailed review of the Xbox Ally X. And if we have anybody in the audience watching this video who's not from India, who's probably from the US or Europe, and if you like the review, then please do share it with your friends and family, because we're trying to build an audience around PC gaming and handheld, and review them on day one, if possible, please. Alright, that's it from me for this one. I'll see you guys in the next one. Until then, keep tracking and stay safe.